So I just wanted to go through the key concepts of KINERACTIVE because there is quite a lot of different ways to configure KINERACTIVE. So as long as you understand the key concepts, you'll be able to create any kind of interactions that you want with KINERACTIVE. First main concept is that the interactive manager, which is here in our scene, it's going to be in every scene in order for KINERACTIVE to work. That shoots out raycasts. And those raycasts look for colliders. Now if your collider or your trigger contains an input handler component, like this one here, we've got the box collider and an input handler component, then the KINERACTIVE manager will enable that input handler. So let's see that in action. We can see that our input handler is disabled here. So let's use our crosshair to shoot the ray at the input handler, and we can see that the input handler gets ticked, which means it's enabled as we look at it and away from it again, unticked. So the other thing that happens is as soon as the input handler component is enabled, the input handler component moves the KINERACTIVE dedicated audio source component to the button, so that way the switch sound, the clicking sound, is coming from the correct area. The other thing it does is display our UI instructions. So as we look at it, we can see the instructions pop up. As we look away, the instructions go away, and all that's doing is just enabling these images as we're looking at it and disabling them again, and that's what the input handler does. Now the thing that actually makes the hand move is not the input handler. The input handler uses inputs. Now the hand movement is done by the self-activated input component, which self-activates as soon as the input handler activates. And this component is what is moving the hand back and forth from our knee to our ready to press position. So when the input handler gets enabled, it goes through its list of inputs. We've got the list here. I've only got 2, but you can have as many as you like. And as soon as that's enabled, it starts checking for input, whether it's a click. Obviously self-activated input is activated by itself, so it doesn't need any input from the player. But the button input does. That's waiting for the left mouse or control key to be pressed, and then that carries out what the settings are in there. And then we've got our touchable component, and that's the representation in game of the button. It's also the logic of the button too. So that means that we've got the main components are the KINERACTIVE manager, which needs to be in every scene, and then we've got the input handler, which needs to be on every object that we want to interact with, because that's how KINERACTIVE decides whether or not we can interact with something. And the way we decide how we want our hand to move and what triggers our hand to move and so forth is that is set in the inputs. So the input handler will wait for one of these inputs to get triggered, and then it will carry out whatever the settings are in that input. So for the button input, it's waiting for the fire 1 button. It'll move the left hand at this speed to this position and run this animation, and then run this method as well, and the method is the touchable button component. So the touchables are the in-game representation of anything our character will be able to touch: buttons, switches, levers, that kind of thing. So what that means is we can change the type of inputs we have and the type of touchable components we have to make just about any interactive object we can think of. So we could remove the touchable button and replace it with a rotator touchable instead. And then if we were to press fire 1, it would run this event here. And instead of press button, it would say, instead of touchable button press, we would select rotator dot next rotation or something like that, and that would move our lever back and forth. So it would be that easy to change a button to a lever, for example. We could even then remove the button input and put in an axis input, and then put in a second axis input. And what that would do is that we could make maybe one axis move the lever upwards, and then maybe another axis could move the lever downwards. So we could use, for example, our analog stick to move the lever up and down or something like that. Or we could just keep it simple. So really that is the key concepts. We've got our manager that looks for input handlers to switch them on and off. We've got various types of inputs, buttons, keystrokes, joystick movements, and then we've got touchables, which are things that move and rotate to represent the switches and buttons and levers and steering wheels inside the game. And then we just use events to make those things move. And then on the actual touchables themselves, they also have their own set of events. So when they move into a certain position or get rotated a certain amount, they will trigger sounds, lights, enemy spawns, whatever you decide. And that's really how it all works. And if you got any questions, please leave a comment, please contact the support email, and I'll certainly help you out.